companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We've come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development in infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Wow, so much going on today. I'll be bringing you up to date on news as we continue through the through the 3 hours of the program. Just a heads up, in our third hour, Nick Hanauer, one of the founders of the Patriotic Millionaires, is going to drop by and talk about wealth tax. The Republicans are all hysterical about, we can't afford to pay for, unemployment benefits for people. We have to save that money for tax cuts for billionaires. Yeah, right. Well, we can raise some money with a wealth tax. We'll talk about that in the third hour. And over the weekend, I published a couple of pieces over at thomhartmann.medium.com. One in particular about the Buy American, this whole Buy American process. And I'll explain all that in some detail after the first break in the show. But interestingly, published that piece over the weekend, and today the Biden administration announces that they're going to do what I suggested in the article, which no president has done since Ronald Reagan. And I can't claim that there's any relationship between the two, but it's a fascinating story, and I'll share it with you. I've also got a great Geeky Science story for you that we'll get to at some point during the day. But I want to start at the beginning, and that is this piece in the Washington Post a couple of days ago. But it's just now starting to get some attention. I noticed that CNN was reporting on it this morning. that the Justice Department is saying, we're not sure that we really want to prosecute all the people who broke into the Capitol. Excuse me. And I'm like, what? I mean, I think so I published a piece today, and I tweeted this out. You can find it on Twitter. You can find it on our Facebook page. You can find it over at medium.com. And presumably on our blog, or it'll shortly be there, that Americans are just, I think, starting to realize, I think it's really starting to sink in for a lot of Americans, exactly what happened on January 6th. That this was an actual attempt to violently overthrow the government of the United States, to assassinate Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi. They built a gallows outside. We had a carpenter call into the program a week or so ago and say, I build houses for a living. I've built something like 500 houses, and I can tell you that thing was well made by professionals. And I found a close-up photo of it because it sparked my curiosity, of that gallows outside the Capitol building. And sure enough, I mean, countersunk, bolts that are, those giant, like half-inch diameter, 6-inch long bolts. And it was made by, it wasn't made with 2x4s, it was made with 4x4s. And I mean, this is serious. This was an actual, real, this was not symbolic. This was a gallows complete with steps. They built steps up to it. It was a gallows designed to kill people, to hang people. I mean, they were marching through the halls chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and "Where's Nancy?" They smeared feces, their own poop, on the floors and walls. They damaged and vandalized at least a half a dozen priceless paintings. They trashed government offices. They stole top secret stuff. And this was entirely the effort of one political party. And that's the important point here. That's the thing that I think that, we just absolutely need to pay attention to. That, I get it that, there's now, as far as I can tell, 2 Fox News hosts who, whenever they talk about the coup attempt on January 6th, talk about Democrat infiltrators. There were none. There's absolutely no documentation for that. These people were wearing MAGA hats. They were carrying Trump flags. They were Republicans. And now they're saying that they want mercy and compassion and understanding. The guy who was dressed like a naked Viking with the giant, with the fur over his shoulders and the horns and everything, he's saying, well, I was just doing what Donald Trump told me to do. In fact, apparently, a number of them, that's going to be their defense as they go into court, is we were just doing what the President of the United States told us to do. I mean, there's film of these guys as they're confronting the Capitol Police at the beginning of the siege saying, Donald Trump sent us here. Your boss sent us here. You have to let us in. He told us to come here. This is going to be their defense. See, they want us to understand that it's not their fault. We're just supposed to start understanding these folks, these Republicans. This is the same Republican Party who, for 50 years, has waged a brutal war on drugs that H.R. Haldeman, Richard Nixon's his chief domestic policy advisor, came right out and said, we did this to make it criminal to be so that we could easily arrest black people and anti-war hippies. And they've done that. And thousands of black people and a few anti-war hippies have rotted in prison for years as a result of Nixon's war on drugs, the Republican Party's war on drugs. This is the Republican Party who waged a no-mercy campaign of imprisoning refugees, fleeing violence in their home countries, tearing their children away from them, putting their children in cages for months, losing over 600 of them, saying no mercy. They now want mercy. This is the same Republican Party that says no exceptions to the death penalty. In the last 3 months, they have executed more people than in the last 56 years at the federal level, combined. This is the same no compassion Republican Party that's now asking for compassion, that for years and years and years has said, if somebody falls on hard times, we have no obligation to provide them with government-funded housing or food stamps or extended unemployment benefits. In fact, every Republican administration back to Reagan has cut back on unemployment benefits, and then a Democrat comes in and re-expands them. This is the Republican Party that has worked for 80-plus years to end Social Security, to privatize it and turn it over to the banks, and to gut Medicare and Medicaid. These are the people who spent 40 years so glorifying guns that America is the worldwide center for school shootings. And when first graders were gunned down at Sandy Hook, this is, these people who want a discussion now about whether or not they should just be let go. These are the same people who refuse to even discuss taking weapons of war off our streets. This is the same Republican Party that is now talking about, well, let's, have the rule of law, and let's be careful, and let's all have justice, and, this is the same Republican Party that cheered when Dick Cheney and George W. Bush captured people in Iraq and Afghanistan who didn't commit any crimes other than that their neighbors wanted to make $5,000, which is more than, 3 years' salary, by turning them in, and then sent them off to black sites to be tortured and executed, and they ended up in Guantanamo. And now the Washington Post says that, maybe the Justice Department can't handle all these prosecutions. And, we really need to understand. Maybe it wasn't their fault. Really? I'll finish my rant after the break, but stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'm not inclined to show mercy at the moment, suffice it to say. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hi. I remembered my first regular job application where I had to sign that little provision that I had never at any time since 1934 or someone back there had been a member of a group which advocated the violent overthrow of the United States government. Well, it occurs to me that now Donald Trump fits very squarely in that category, along with his mouthpiece, Giuliani, because...
And 147 Republicans in the House and 12 of them in the Senate.
Arguably, some of them. I won't go into how culpable any of them is individually, but certainly Trump and Giuliani. And so I've written both my senators and advocated a criminal referral, quite apart from the trial of impeachment, advocating a trial under 18 U.S. Code 2385 for those two, because it's quite clear that they have tried to overthrow the Constitution and the government of the United States by force and violence. Remember that Mr. Trump, even when he was running for office in the first place, was raising assassination as a possible remedy if he lost an election. And it doesn't seem to have changed.
Second Amendment remedies.
Over the 4 years. Second Amendment remedies, quite so. So I just wanted to suggest that anyone who wants to join in my little bandwagon and write to their senators and advocate that sort of referral, I won't have any disappointment if you could join this little movement. Also, I just want to point out
did.
Okay. I wanted to point out that the the crimes of individual one are not just against all the majority of people who voted to remove him from office, they're also for all the people who voted for him and didn't really consider that they were voting to overturn the U.S. Constitution and have power transferred by violent mobs rather than by the vote of the people.
Yeah, I mean that's essentially what's going on here, and that's essentially what they're advocating, and it's mind-boggling that anybody would even apologize for this. I mean this just blows my mind. That we took it seriously when they plotted a coup to reverse basically the Civil War by assassinating Lincoln so that Andrew Johnson, a slaveholder himself, a former Southern senator, would become the president of the United States and would put an end to Reconstruction. And it's just, I just find the whole thing mind-boggling that these guys are going along with it. I did notice just a minute ago there was a caller on the board who said that they disagreed with me and wanted to say that it was Antifa who was charging the Capitol. And no, I'm serious. I would love to hear the evidence. If somebody has some evidence of that, give me a shout. We'll talk about it. But I don't. Antifa is the anti-fascist movement. Right. And it seems to me that overthrowing the government of the United States, the democratically elected Republican government of the United States, overthrowing that is a fascist goal. I just don't get it. Anyhow, Mike, thanks for the call. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. So remember back in 2020 when in California, Uber and Lyft were pouring all kinds of money into Prop 22, which basically would allow them to continue claiming that their drivers weren't actually employers of Uber. They were actually contract workers. They were all independent small businesses. And therefore, the company didn't have to pay for unemployment insurance, didn't have to pay for workman's compensation if somebody got injured, didn't have to offer them any health insurance. In fact, basically couldn't even do it. And there's a whole bunch of other benefits that are associated and protections that you actually get, state and federal protections that you get as an employee that you do not have available to you as a contractor. Well, it passed because of millions of dollars from Uber, and now the fallout is happening. Companies across California are starting to fire their workers and telling them, we'll hire you back. I give examples in our new video over at thomhartmann.com. So as I was saying, This is insane. Here's a couple of actual quotes from the Washington Post. They're saying that some of these people are, quote, lesser offenders, and, quote, most of those arrested so far have no criminal records. There's a first time for everything, right? Not to mention the Post article adds, there's also a question over whether charging all the rioters could swamp the federal court system. Then maybe we need to bring in some temporary judges from elsewhere. I mean, in 1865, when we had an actual coup against the United States government and Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and a slaveholder, Andrew Johnson, was put in as president to blow up basically the results of the Civil War, and he set us down that course. They hanged 4 of the participants. Now, I'm not advocating the death penalty for anybody here, but, they took it seriously. Samuel Arnold, Dr. Samuel Mudd, and Michael O'Loughlin received life sentences of hard labor. Edmund Spangler got a 6-year sentence. John Wilkes Booth was chased into a burning barn where he was shot. Remember when Roy Cohn was leading the charge, Donald Trump's lawyer was leading the charge to put Ethel and Julius Rosenberg in the electric chair? And he succeeded, even though there was virtually no evidence against Ethel. She apparently had no idea what her husband was up to. George Washington put down an insurrection on horseback as president. Abraham Lincoln fought a bloody war against insurrections. We deal with traitors in this country. And frankly, I end my article today. Like I said, you can find links to it over on our Facebook page and on Twitter. I end my article today by pointing out that, just ask Rudy Giuliani what he thinks about this. I mean, not specifically about storming the Capitol, because we all know what he thinks about that. But, for years and years and years, what he said was, he called it his broken windows policy and stop and frisk. That if you don't stop small crimes, you're going to get large crimes. If you don't hold criminals to account the first time that they're arrested, they're going to be back a second, third, and fourth time. Rudy Giuliani. Meanwhile, we're finding at least 31 law enforcement officers in 12 states are being investigated for this sedition, for treason. 9 of the law enforcement officers are from one Pennsylvania Police Department, 3 from Los Angeles Police Department, 1 is an LA County Sheriff's Deputy, Oklahoma Sheriff, a New Hampshire Police Chief. I mean, it goes on and on. There's a good piece about that over at Daily Kos. Meanwhile, the state Republican and Pete Sessions, the Republican from Texas, had tweeted back 3 days before the insurrection, before the coup attempt, the failed coup. Let's call it a fail. It wasn't it was an attempt, but it was an actual coup that failed. 3 days before that, Pete Sessions tweeted, "Had a great meeting today with folks from Stop the Steal at our nation's capital." Oh, another one giving them tours. "I encouraged them to keep fighting, and I assured them that I look forward to doing my duty on January 6th. And then he put the hashtag Stop the Steal. Right. Well, yesterday he deleted that tweet. I wonder why. Could it be used as evidence against him in a court of law? Meanwhile, I pointed out over the weekend in a piece over at Medium that if America doesn't implement the Buy American vision now, the 21st century will be the Chinese century. Basically pointing out that in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt passed a law. The federal government represents almost a fifth, a little more than a sixth of all purchasing in the United States. It's a massive amount of money. And Franklin Roosevelt passed this law that when the federal government wants to buy something, they must buy it from an American manufacturer. Now, there was a waiver provision in the law in case of an emergency. If the government desperately needs something right now and you can only buy it from Germany, okay, go ahead and buy it from Germany. But that's what the law said. Well, when Reagan came into office, he started handing out these waivers like candy. Particularly at the request of IBM, ironically enough, that was moving their manufacturing operations overseas. Bill Clinton continued the practice. George W. Bush continued the practice. Barack Obama continued the practice. Donald Trump continued offering waivers to all these companies so that they, or to all these federal agencies so that they didn't have to buy American-made goods. And I published this over the weekend, and this morning the Biden administration announced that today Joe Biden is signing an executive order, no more waivers unless it's a genuine emergency. This could bring back literally millions of good-paying manufacturing jobs and bring the wealth of America back from China and Vietnam and Malaysia, etc., back to the United States. I mean, that was the essence of, Wealth of Nations, of Adam Smith's book. So I'm really happy to see that. That is a big deal. But meanwhile, what do we do with these traitors? I mean, is the Washington Post right? Or is the Department of Justice right? That, maybe we just shouldn't prosecute them. There's just too many. Or is something really bad going on here? I mean, the Arizona Republican Party has now censured Cindy McCain, their own governor, Doug Ducey, and Jeff Flake.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Are we looking at an entire American political party that has been taken over by a crazed fascist movement? It sure looks like it to me.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice in our politics is just that stark. This book is offered in a spirit of hope, but with a sense of alarm. My hope is inspired by the broad and principled opposition that Donald Trump's presidency called forth. It is a movement that can and should be the driving force in our politics long after Trump is gone. His abuses of office, his divisiveness, his bigotry, his autocratic habits, and his utter lack of seriousness about the responsibilities of the presidency drew millions of previously disengaged citizens to the public square and the ballot box. The danger he represented inspired young Americans to participate in our public life at unprecedented levels. Tens of thousands of Americans, especially women, have gathered in libraries, diners, and church basements to share wisdom, to organize, and in many cases to run for office themselves. These newly engaged citizens have created an opportunity to build a broad alliance for practical and visionary government, as promising as anything since the Great Depression gave Franklin Roosevelt the chance to build the New Deal coalition. To seize this opening, progressives and moderates must realize that they are allies who have more in common than they sometimes wish to admit. They share a commitment to what public life can achieve and the hope that government can be decent again. They reject the appeals to racism that have been Trump's calling card and the divisiveness at the heart of his electoral strategy. Together, they long for a politics focused on freedom, fairness, and the future. This new politics would be rooted in the economic justice that has always been the left's driving goal, and in the problem-solving approach to government that moderates have long championed. It's true that these camps often battle over whether the nation should seek restoration or transformation in the years after Trump. In fact, our country needs both. To restore the democratic norms we have always valued, we must begin to heal the social and economic wounds that led to Trump's presidency in the first place. Yet there is resistance to common ground among progressives and moderates alike. They often mistrust each other's motives, battle fiercely over tactics, argue over how much change our country needs, and squabble over whether specific policy ideas go too far or not far enough. The moderate says, hey, progressive, you think that if you just lay out the boldest and most ambitious approach to any given problem, the people will rally to your side. Really? For one thing, people may like your objective, but think you're changing things way more than we have to. And we can battle to the death over, say, a Democratic Party platform plank or the first draft of a bill. But without the hard negotiating and compromising that legislative politics requires, a bold idea will remain just a platform plank. That really doesn't do anyone any good. You subject everyone to so many litmus tests, so we might as well be in chemistry class. And God save us from your abuse on Twitter if we disagree with you. You lefties have no idea how to win elections outside of Berkeley or Brooklyn, and some of your ideas are so sweeping that they'll scare potential voters away. At this point, the moderate is likely to wield the sturdy old punchline, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But hold on, says the progressive. You moderates spend so much time negotiating with yourselves that you compromise away goals and priorities before the real battle even begins. Your ideas get so soggy and complicated that they mobilize no one and mostly put people to sleep. Better to have the courage of your convictions, lay out your hopes plainly and passionately, and inspire voters to join in. Besides, you middle-of-the-roaders were so petrified of Ronald Reagan and the right wing that you caved into the Gipper's economic ideas, let inequality run wild, and gave us a racist and grossly unfair criminal justice system. The extremists have pulled the political center so far right that the only way back to sanity is to show our fellow citizens what a real progressive program looks like. At the risk of sounding like a perhaps unwelcome counselor attempting to ease a family quarrel, I would plead with moderates and progressives to listen to each other carefully. If the events since 2016 do not teach moderates and progressives that they must find ways of working together, nothing will. If they fail to heed each other's advice and take each other's concerns seriously, they will surrender the political system to an increasingly undemocratic right with no interest in any of their shared goals, priorities, and commitments. Moderates are right about the complexity of getting things done in a democracy. Even when the boldest ideas have prevailed, they did so because complex coalitions were built. Important, and it should be said often legitimate interests were accommodated, and some lesser goals were left by the wayside to be fought for another day. Moderates are also right that democracy requires persuading those who are open to change but worry about how this or that reform might work in practice or affect them personally. Think losing their private health insurance. Disdaining as sellouts, those who raise inconvenient questions or express qualms is not the way to build a majority for reform. Moderates are also right that Americans in large number are tired of politics that involves more yelling than dialogue, more demonizing than understanding. But progressives are right to say that for the last 3 decades, moderates have spent too much time negotiating with themselves. Consider all the effort Democrats put into wooing Republicans by responding to the proposals to amend Obamacare. The book co-written by J.D.
On the Science Revolution, Dr. Justin A. Frank is here on the psychology of mob mentality and violence. What propels a mob? Dr. Sam Metz, a member of Mad as Hell Doctors, drops by on the need for federal legislation to allow individual states to create true statewide universal health care plans, especially single-payer plans. Plus, in Geeky Science, I've discovered how 11 minutes can save the quality of your life. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. So let me add just one more question, I suppose, to this conversation about whether or not the Justice Department should just cut some slack to some of these traitors. What the hell is going on with the Republican Party? I mean, this was an entirely Republican effort. And now we've got the Hawaii GOP tweeting yesterday a video from this Hawaii commentator. His name is Tarl Warwick. I believe, actually, maybe he's not even in Hawaii. I'm not actually sure, but they retweeted it. They retweeted his video, and they said he has an edgy name and frequently uses profanity. His commentary and analysis, however, is generally high quality. It's good to periodically step outside the bubble of corporate commentators for additional perspective. What's the additional perspective that this guy said in his video that the Republican Party of Hawaii just retweeted? And I quote, well, actually, this is one of his earlier videos. Apparently, but in any case, here's what he said in an earlier video, not the one they retweeted, but the same guy. Quote: "The famous Auschwitz shower was quite literally a showering station. They've got like swimming pools at those places. What's not clear is if this was a deliberate extermination effort on a grand scale or whether they were primarily focused in eliminating criminals and the sick." Really? So you've got the Hawaii Republican Party retweeting a Holocaust denier. You've got the Arizona Republican Party voting yesterday to censure Cindy McCain, saying that she, quote, supports globalist policies, which is code for the international Jew. And no, I'm not making that up. This is this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. The shorthand for it on over at the Daily Stormer and other neo-Nazi sites is globalist policies. They condemned Doug Ducey, their governor, for asking people to wear masks. They said that Republicans. This was Texas. The Texas Republican Party said, go to the site Gab and identify yourself with "We Are the Storm." Right? "We Are the Storm" is literally a phrase from the Daily Stormer, the official Nazi website here in the United States. This is the Texas Republican Party. Oh, and they also went after Jeff Flake. Why the Republicans in Arizona? So, and they went after Jeff Flake for saying that Trump had some responsibility in this act of treason. What the hell is going on with the Republican Party? Is this just like they're falling for propaganda that some foreign country is putting on Facebook, or is this what they have always been? I'm increasingly thinking this is what they've always been. I've told you before the story of when I was, 13 years old or thereabouts. My dad took me to a John Birch Society meeting. Now, he thought they were crackpots, but he wanted me to see who they were. And I picked up a copy of John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason. They were giving them away. Turns out Fred Koch was probably paying for it. He had been funding the John Birch Society at that time. And John Stormer's book, The None Dare Call It Treason, was about how the communists have infiltrated the State Department. And I was, freaked out after I read that book. But that was part of the GOP back then. And this was like, 1963. So, anyhow, Lisa in San Francisco. Hey, Lisa, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to throw in a little factoid that I heard. I don't remember which news outlet it came from, but I do remember hearing that when they stormed the Capitol, some people dressed in all black to purposely imitate Antifa, or so people would think that they were Antifa.
Yeah, but I haven't seen any of those in the pictures. And my concern would be if somebody showed up looking like they were an anti-fascist protester or a Black Lives Matter protester, that they would be set upon by the mob. It seems like that wouldn't be such a good idea. No,
but they knew it was a common knowledge. So it wouldn't be like they were the lone person dressed. I heard was there was quite a few of them dressed like that to give that impression.
Yeah.
So
well, I haven't seen the pictures, but I've certainly been hearing the rhetoric. I mean, I caught Sean Hannity over the weekend, talking about how, they're Democrat infiltrators. That's what it was. It was Democrat infiltrators. Right. Lisa, thank you for the call. Thanks for the heads up on that. Audrey in Chicago. Hey, Audrey, what's up?
Hey, Tom. My comment is this regarding the request for the pleading for mercy for these insurrectionists or people who are accused of insurrection, people who charged in the Capitol building. Justice in and of itself, in its true form, is a form of mercy. And it is, what they are seeking, when they say they want mercy, they're not really seeking mercy. What they're seeking is absolution. They want us to pretend, this is no big whoop. They didn't really do anything. Let's just let them go. Let's be let bygones be bygones. That's the kind of treatment apparently that they're accustomed to receiving. And of course, this is just way too severe an act for that. And you've talked about the history of the Republican Party acting on its agenda during the Trump administration, and for the audacity and the nerve of them to suggest exactly. I mean, let's face facts here. This has not been the party of Abraham Lincoln for at least the last probably 100 years. With the exception of President Teddy Roosevelt and President Eisenhower, the Republican Party leadership has not tried to act on behalf of working people for almost a century.
I am totally with you, Audrey. And Teddy Roosevelt got thrown out of the party. He started his own, the Bull Moose Party. And Dwight Eisenhower, when he was thinking of running for president, everybody assumed he was going to run as a Democrat because nobody knew his politics. I want to move along because I see Steve is on the board and he wants to tell us the protesters at the Capitol were Democrats. So, Audrey, thank you so much for your call and your contribution. I agree with you. Steve, give me some evidence that these people storming the Capitol, spreading poop all over the walls and the floors, vandalizing priceless paintings, that they were Democrats? Really?
Yes, I really believe that. They've been trying to get rid of Trump for 4 years, and they will do anything they could, and they finally succeeded in doing it. And I really believe the leaders of that bunch on January the 6th at the White House were Democrats. Now, there might have been some Republicans
you mean at the Capitol?
Them. Yes.
Can you, Steve? Steve, first of all, Trump had already been removed. I mean, he lost the election by 7 million votes. He was gone, so number one. But number two, can you name one Democrat who, I mean, they've already arrested something like 140 people. Those names are all public information. So if there was even one Democrat in that crowd, I'm sure that Sean Hannity has been reporting on it over at Fox News. Can you please give me the name of even one Democrat who was arrested at the Capitol building?
No, I can't give you any.
Then what makes you think that?
Well, I just believe it because they've tried to get rid
because you
of
saw it on Fox?
For 4 years. They've tried everything.
And they threw him out.
Tom,
we threw him out. He lost by 7 million votes, Steve.
Yeah, I know.
And how would Democrats stopping the certification of Joe Biden as president, how would that throw out Donald Trump?
Sure, Tom. They got the mail-in ballots to begin with. I knew before the election that if they got the mail-in ballots, that Trump wasn't going to win.
Because Democrats did not want to go out in the pandemic and expose themselves to death and disease?
Well, whatever, yeah. Yep. I just believe.
I mean, we've been using mail-in ballots for 20 years here in Portland, and in those 20 years, there have been 5 or 6 cases of people voting who couldn't legally vote. That's it. We use biometrics, which is more accurate, and all mail-in ballots use biometrics. They compare signatures. It's harder it is easier to buy a fake ID than it is to fake a signature. It's almost impossible to fake a signature. And so, mail-in ballots are actually more secure than showing up at the polling place with a fake ID. How did that help? How did that hurt Donald Trump?
Well, sir, I couldn't hear you too good, but
okay.
I just
Steve, I appreciate. I'm sorry, we're hitting the break here. I appreciate your respectful. Very often when people call and disagree with me, they start screaming obscenities and things. I appreciate a respectful and decent conversation with you and look forward to others in the future. But respectfully, Steve, there is no evidence to support your argument.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
None whatsoever, and I am not ready to play nice with these guys. We'll be back. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind?
Oh, it's a beautiful day out here in Southern California, Professor. Listen, whenever I listen to conservative conversations, they're never principled. They're always self-serving. Do you remember Benghazi?
I did. Yeah, who could forget?
Okay, they beat that dead horse. Good God Almighty! I wish that I saw Marco Rubio over the weekend. You did too this morning. I wish he had the same spirit. Mr. Rubio, I wish he had the same spirit towards enforcing the 14th Amendment, Section 3, regarding this failed coup that he had back in the days of Benghazi. And the problem that we got here, my brother, is anybody that came up with the Stop the Steal, if they were a Stop the Steal voice, that means they contested the election, which means they were rejecting the election, which means they should be summoned into court. And they were part of this failed coup because they were complacent in this failed coup. You also got to get your boy Rupert Murdoch in there, Sean Hannity in there. You got to get Laura Ingraham in there, and you got to get Tucker Carlson in there and asking where they got their information when they were telling all that stuff to the public. Now, watch this. Here's the problem you got with the 14th Amendment. That means that 134 congressmen and 2 senators are going to have to answer for their Stop the Steal voices. And that's a big one, Professor. That's a big problem right now. If we don't deal with this right now, we're going to set a bad precedent for the world and our country. If we don't punish these guys, it's a bad precedent to set. Now, we ain't got to put them in front of no firing squad, but we got to do something with them. And thank you for this platform.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Morris, and I think we need to do something really serious with them. John in Los Angeles, also listening on KPFK. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for everything. Democracy's candle is flickering, but not quite extinguished. I want to.
I think it's coming back.
The Supreme Court just threw out all the lower court decisions to charge Trump with annulments, selling out to foreign adversaries, whoever the highest bidders are, for, having dictator's terrorist state as hotel. That's one point I wanted to make. And
well, let me just to be clear, John, just so people who are listening don't misunderstand what either of us are saying. What the Supreme Court said was that these lower court rulings that said that Trump had violated the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution were not something that the Supreme Court could rule on now because Trump is no longer president. Now, I think that's a cop-out. I think John Roberts is afraid of getting death threats too. But they did not rule in favor of Trump. They chose not to rule, essentially, is what happened. And thus, those lower court cases got thrown out because Trump's no longer president, so he can't be stopped. The lower court cases were arguing that Trump needed to immediately put his assets in a blind trust and, no more Trump company deals with the federal government. Well, he's no longer president, so the Supreme Court said we can't do that. Anyhow, back to you, John. Sorry.
Well, I know how high and mighty they hold the emperor, former emperor.
Yeah.
But this is what John Adams said, and he was the son of a founding father. And he said it clearly. I hold myself, so long as I have the breath of life in my body, amenable to impeachment by this House for everything I did during the time I held any public office. Which makes sense. Otherwise, you could just go on a killing spree and say, hey, I'm not the president anymore. You can't charge me. And, it's just ludicrous. And one more quick point about the precedent of impeachment. When they impeached Belknap, okay, he was President Ulysses S. Grant's longtime Secretary of War. But Belknap, he had a couple lavish parties and, he's taking care of his first and second wife. That's different than taking care of hookers on taxpayers' expense. And also, he was a five-time war hero. He got the Congressional Medal.
John, I'm sorry, I'm out of time. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com about conspiracy theories. Abby Richards came up with a kind of a hierarchy of conspiracies, maybe a variation on the old Maslow hierarchy. And it goes from actual conspiracies to maybe this was a conspiracy, maybe not, we have questions, to this is kind of crazy stuff, but who knows, flying saucers, for example, to actual science denial, conspiracy theories that actually serve to promote the interests of a particular industry or wealthy individuals, to the totally crazy stuff, the flat earth, the reptilian overlords, and all that kind of thing, conspiracy theories that can do tremendous damage. And, one of those being one of the conspiracy theories that, brought two Republicans into Congress this year. So anyhow, I lay the whole thing out with a new video for our supporters over at thomhartmann.com. Oh my goodness, welcome back. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey Robin, what's up?
Hi Tom, how are you? I'm going to chip in with how you started the week out about the issue of the Republicans, what's happening to the party and the Trump situation. I am not the same as you. I don't waffle back and forth worrying about the Republican Party and then speaking out against them. I want the Republican Party to represent the 35% of the people who are actually Republicans and whatever it might be in this thing. So I actually want Trump not to be convicted in the Senate, certainly have the impeachment, but not to be convicted, because I want Trump to hang around the Republican Party like an albatross, for all of the years he has left in his life. I don't worry about the Republicans, Tom. They're the most well-funded, kind of secretive party that's out there. They're going to rebound. And whatever. So I'm pretty good with hanging anything that goes forward from here. We have to tie all Republicans to Trump, and then we're gonna get to the 65% of the people that actually have progressive thoughts. And last Friday, I wanted to
Well, hang on just a second, Robin. Before you move on, I just want to put a punctuation mark on what you're saying. Donald Trump is talking about starting his own party, the so-called Patriots Party. I say more power to him. I mean, the only reason Woodrow Wilson became president in 1912, I think it was because Teddy Roosevelt split from the Republican Party and split the Taft vote, as I recall. Teddy Roosevelt pulled almost a third of the vote, and as a result, a Democrat won the White House. Let Donald Trump start a third party.
I'd probably send them some money, Tom. Absolutely. Have them fracture the Republicans. The second point I wanted to make last Friday about what we learned from 20 and 21 elections is chronicled by Stacey Abrams, and she won Georgia by organizing locally. And so that we need the mail-in paper ballots, and we need to organize locally as we move to 2022. If we don't, we're going to have a hard time winning. So those are my 2 points. Don't you worry your pretty little face about the Republican Party, Tom. They're going to be fine, okay? We got to beat them.
Okay.
Okay?
No, they've got the billionaires. They've got the billionaires. Robin, thank you for the call. Jeff in Kenosha County, Wisconsin. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Long-time listener, finally, first-time caller. You first educated me years ago on the business plot of 1933, and I've been fascinated with it ever since. Done a lot of research on it. Smedley Butler is a big fan of his. And from what I understand, nobody was really charged in that. And I'm wondering if you think this could be what we just went through is kind of a phase 2 of that. Only this time the corporatists, through intense propaganda, have made the people like at the Capitol their fall guy, and they're gonna take the punishment for it.
I do. Thanks for bringing that up, Jeff, because the logic that Franklin Roosevelt used when he strong-armed the congressional Democrats into shutting down the investigation into the business plot. And for those people who don't know what we're talking about, in 1933, a group of wealthy industrialists, and we don't know for sure exactly who they all are, but there was definitely a chemical, what in today's dollars would be billionaire in there, and a banking billionaire in there. They, along with a right-wing veterans group that had 500,000 people committed to marching on Washington, D.C. to seize Franklin Roosevelt and physically remove him from the White House. They approached the most famous Marine general at that point in time in the history of America. He is Smedley Butler, who was a decorated war hero from both World War I and the Spanish-American War, as I recall. And
twice awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Exactly. He was. Yeah, he was famous the way Eisenhower was famous in '52, and they came to Smedley Butler and said, "We want you to lead this movement because you have so much credibility, and we can even talk about making you president." And Butler blew the whistle on him, and this led to a congressional investigation, and they were going to go after these guys, and FDR shut it down because he was afraid that it would split the country even worse than it already was. And that's the part of the rationale that's being used right now by Republicans who are saying, oh, well, just prosecute a few people, maybe one or two, maybe an exam, and don't prosecute any of those people in Congress. That's awesome.
You're right.
And I'm with you, Jeff. I think that, I agree with Rudy Giuliani that if you don't arrest people who are criminals, they're going to come back. Giuliani used it in a racist way and all that kind of stuff. But the point is, you have to hold people to account. You have to.
Absolutely.
Or it happens again.
Yes.
Oh, was it Mark Twain said history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes?
And you look at the time frame too. I've heard you talk about approximately 80 years or so. The lifespan of the average human being. Here we go again.
And 80 years before the business plot was when Andrew Johnson, basically pardoned everybody in the Confederacy. Maybe Lincoln had done that before him. I'm not sure, but basically, the Confederate soldiers, let's heal the country with malice toward none and charity to all. I think accountability is an important thing. Jeff, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We've come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, the news is flying fast and furious. The Inspector General of the Department of Justice is now investigating whether any members of the Department of Justice, and this would be that like number 2 or 3 guy who was willing to conspire with Trump to use the power of the federal government to force or intimidate Georgia into changing the outcome of the election in Georgia. And that's the one we know about. We don't know about what they might have tried to do in Arizona or in Michigan or in Wisconsin or in Pennsylvania. But I think you can safely predict if Donald Trump was doing this in Georgia, knowing that he needed at least 2 other states, that he wasn't just doing it in Georgia. But the DOJ is now looking into this, and that is good news. On the coronavirus front, this is interesting news. The Washington Post had an article on Friday, the first paragraph of which said that the British variant, this B.1.1.7 variant of the coronavirus, is not controlled by the normal measures that we use. In other words, masks and social distancing are not as effective against this virus. Now, nobody's exactly certain why, but the best speculation that I'm reading over, like at British Medical Journal, where there's a Really, really fascinating and well participated in conversation among physicians about this, is that the alterations to the spike protein, which is how this virus attaches itself to the angiotensin receptor sites in our blood vessels, which is how it invades the human body, that those mutations to that spike protein make it much easier. Normally, you'd have to have hundreds or thousands of viruses kind of wandering past human tissues, and one of them or a small number of them might link in and or whatever the critical number is to overwhelm the immune system. That's still an unknown also. Apparently, this spike protein, it's more like Velcro. It's much more effective at sticking to us. And so it takes a whole lot less of it. But that's one theory. The other theory is that when people get this, that they're expelling much larger amounts of virus in the 2 days before they show any symptoms. That's when apparently people are maximally infectious. So there's that. And Boris Johnson, we talked about this on Friday, said that it looks like it might be as much as 30% more lethal. Again, that's still stuff they're trying to sort out. But now there's this new one out of South Africa, another mutation of this virus. And these mutations are all happening, by the way, because so many hundreds of millions of people, maybe even a billion people, actually have this virus. And, you get billions or trillions of viruses in your body, and they're constantly mutating, and some of those mutations are successful and effective. And so anyhow, there's this new one out of South Africa. Both the South African variant and the British variant have shown up in the UK, by the way. The South African variant appears to be able to infect people who have already had the normal variant. In other words, you can get infected again, and it also appears that it may be more potent. And so now that's the bad news. The good news is, this is the headline over at CNBC. Moderna says it's working on COVID booster shot for variant in South Africa. Says current vaccine provides some protection. This is, what we're seeing here, and nobody is talking about this, but I think it deserves mention, is nature is fighting back. Now, it's not a conscious. Well, maybe it is. I mean, if you accept James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, the planet is a conscious entity. But let's assume for a moment that it's just math. It's just science. That as the human population increases, and we start pushing into parts of the world where we previously never went, the wild areas, we start flushing out of those places species of bats and other animals, civet cats and other animals that are carrying diseases that we have not been exposed to in the past, like this particular, SARS-2 coronavirus. And if nature is fighting back, maybe we should take the clue and start reducing our footprint on this planet, start getting our population under control, start changing the way that we mine and exploit the planet, start changing our food production systems, things like that. Seems like a good idea. The guy who runs CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. Now, I went to CPAC and broadcasted from CPAC every year for at least a decade. It was always great fun because one of my favorite things is debating conservatives. The last couple of months, or the last 6 months, really, it has been almost impossible. Sean has been trying as hard as she can to book conservatives out of this program because nobody wants to debate me. Because they're like, well, we can't defend Trump, really? The Republican Party? But the guy who's the chair of the American Conservative Union that runs CPAC, Matt Schlapp, apparently, this is according to Mediaite, was paid $750,000 by a guy named Parker Petty, P-E-T-I-T, to get him a pardon from Donald Trump. Now, we don't know how much of that money ended up with Donald Trump. Probably not much of it, because Trump never gave him the pardon. But now they're starting to ask questions about the rest of these pardons. Meanwhile, FreedomWorks, the group that brought us the Tea Party, you know, that came into being as a result of the Koch network and a few billionaires wanting to make this thing happen. I got another email from them. H.R. 1, the so-called For the People Act, better known as the GAG Act, introduced by John Sarbanes, would destroy political free speech and give leftist federal government officials massive new control over our elections. Right. What are their specific arguments? What are the things that they're freaked out about? Number one, donor doxing. What the H.R. 1 will do is require nonprofits that dump tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into elections to tell the public who their donors are. Oh, the inhumanity. Oh, my God. Billionaires should be able to hide behind anonymity, and nobody should know that they're influencing elections, right? I mean, if you or I give, you know, I gave some money to Joe Biden's campaign. I gave money to several campaigns. It's all a matter of public record. You can look it up. But if a billionaire gives money to a dark money group, you know, like the foundation associated with FreedomWorks, they don't want to tell you who they are. And they're all freaked out about this. He says, this would leave thousands of patriotic Americans, well, it's actually probably hundreds, you know, the billionaires and the multimillionaires. This would leave thousands of patriotic, notice they're not saying hundreds of thousands or millions, because it's a small number of wealthy right-wing donors. This would leave thousands of patriotic Americans open to harassment and intimidation from Antifa and other violent left-wing groups and organizations. Right. They go on to say the GAG Act would, this is the For the People Act, H.R. 1, prohibit any restrictions on who can vote by mail. Well, that's not altogether true. If you're not a citizen and you can't legally vote, you can't vote by mail. It would weaken voter ID laws currently on the books. Oh, gee, we're going to let students at state colleges use their student ID to vote. It would take power away from state legislatures to redistrict and put it in the hands of so-called independent commissions. That's a good idea. It would end the automatic purging of voters from voter rolls. Wow. And it would force taxpayers to pay for politicians' political campaigns. Hey, it sounds like a plan.
Thom Hartmann Program.
The more I hear from FreedomWorks and these other right-wing groups, the more I like this H.R. 1 thing. Anyhow, we'll pick up your calls in just a minute. Stick around. And welcome back. Paul in Sparta, Michigan. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
I'm in Wisconsin, but that's cool.
Wisconsin. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to get to the doctor in a year, eye doctor in a year to get my glasses upgraded.
I just want to say I'm not willing to play nice with these people. Any Republican. When these Republicans walked into Congress and stepped over GIs laying on the floor in Congress, in the garage, and they go in and they beat their chest and say, oh, my gosh, we got all these GIs laying here. This is just not right. You brought them here by lying to the American public for 2 months that there was a lie going on, that there was a steal.
Yep.
These people should be at home working. Now, my second point is,
I'm with you.
I'm an Air Force veteran. I have 3 children that are Air Force veterans. 2 of them are still in. We are patriots. Any person that stepped a step further than I can go legally on January 6th into the Capitol should be charged with treason. They should be a traitor. They should be charged with a felony. Hopefully, they'll be convicted as a felon and then take their guns away.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the arguments that they're making is that this was in this Washington Post piece, was that while there was Zip Tie Guy and there were the people who were trying to hang Mike Pence and the people who were looking to kill Nancy Pelosi, there were also a lot of people who just kind of came into the Capitol building and wandered around going, whoa, look at that. And that therefore maybe they should get a lesser penalty. Well, it's still criminal trespass.
No mercy. No mercy. You tried to take my home from me.
Yeah.
I'm going to hang up, but thank you, Tom.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul. Good to hear from you. Mark in Sacramento. Hey, Paul. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I got kind of a question for you. As I understand it, the article of impeachment goes to the Senate today that charges Trump with inciting an insurrection. And I was wondering, is there a way like a senator could oppose the swearing in of Cruz and Hawley as jurors in that case, as I believe they were participating in inciting that insurrection? And I was just wondering, am I crazy?
No. In fact, there is a discussion of this. I haven't heard any discussion of it from any of the senators themselves, but among the pundit class, there is some concern that there are a bunch of senators who are going to sit in judgment of a criminal conspiracy that they themselves were parts of.
I mean, I'd love to have my co-conspirators sit on my trial, too. I mean,
right.
that's just nuts.
Yeah, there's 6 of us who robbed the bank. I'd like 5 of us to be on the jury, please.
Exactly.
It's like, really? You're going to try and pull that crap on me? Yeah, it really is. It really and truly is, Mark. And it's not just Cruz and Hawley, by the way. Did you see Rand Paul over the weekends? He's still trying to push the voter fraud lie, the big lie.
Yes, there's a number of others that I think would qualify. Cruz and Hawley just come to mind quickly, but there are
Cruz and Hawley were,
that I believe,
were the ringleaders. But now Rand Paul is trying to establish his prominence in this movement. This is just so wrong. Yeah, but, the reason why, of course, Mark, is because right-wing talk radio and Fox News are now picking up their cause. So now they feel like they got the wind behind them in their sails, Mark, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. There's so much news coming out of the Trump administration, so much corruption, so many crimes. Now they're letting people kill endangered species. Now they're selling off, the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve refuge to big oil companies. Now they're they're authorizing pesticides that we know cause birth defects and damage to children. It's just, step after step after step, that it's so easy to forget that back in July of 2020, it was reported that Jared Kushner and Mike Pence's nephew, John Pence, created a couple of LLCs, American-Made Media Consultants Corporation, that took $617 million of Trump campaign cash, and nobody knows where it went. I'm telling you, these guys are professional grifters. We need to keep an eye on it. There's a whole rant about it over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. Welcome back, 21 minutes past the hour. And Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Yeah, the fact of the matter is some people in the Justice Department are sympathetic to the MAGA cause. I mean, I mentioned a guy last week. They kept introducing him as a expert, FBI expert on terrorism, but he would not say MAGA. He said they were anti-authority extremists, and that piqued my attention. And the reason why is because I did this stuff in Iraq. Okay, look, we all agree that David Petraeus and the Surge, turned the tide, all right? But nobody says why. The reason why it turned the tide is we started paying people not to lay out explosives. Well, why were they laying out explosives? I call it Operation Cat Rodeo. What Al-Qaeda was doing, and Al-Qaeda and others, what they were doing is they were paying people like $100 US to lay an explosive out there, right? These people had a general grievance against U.S. forces, but they were not members of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda gave them $100, an explosive, and said, if you get caught, say you're Al-Qaeda, okay? They were not. And what we did is we paid them more. We outbid outbid Al Qaeda. We paid them more not to lay the explosives out, right? And the reason why this is relevant to what's going on is you have to identify the threat. If you muddle it or it becomes convoluted, you get what I call Operation Cat Rodeo, and that's what we're in right now. And let's say you're sympathetic. Let's say you have a family member that's a MAGA person. And you're like, well, I don't want this MAGA person. I don't want my uncle to get in trouble. Look, you have to enforce the law, because the next time, if you don't, you think of it as an intervention. You need to think of it as an intervention, because next time they might actually kill somebody. It's like these yahoos that were trying to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Do you know there's a very high probability they could have accidentally killed that woman? Mike Pence had his family there. I mean, these are not the brightest bulbs in the box, but behind them are some really mastermind. I call them just, they're true believers. They're true believers, and probably they're ex-military, because I know about Operation Cat Rodeo. These MAGA people know about it, and that's what they are doing. They're trying to muddle. Yeah. They're trying to, and this is some really serious stuff. And if we don't get a handle on it, it's never going to stop. And as far as
I completely agree.
Jeff Flake and these others that have been censured, and even Scaramucci. I mean, I really detested Scaramucci when he was on Trump's side, so I've been listening to him carefully ever since he saw the light. If it wasn't for these people, I would completely write off the Republican Party as a valid political entity. I would, if it wasn't for Scaramucci and Flake and these guys, I would consider the Republican Party as some sort of domestic terror threat, a political arm.
But Flake just got censured by his own state party. I mean, it's like the Republican Party is actually being torn apart right now, and between the conspiracy nut folks and the we're just here for business folks, basically. Jeff Flake was I'm just here for business. I'll vote the interests of the billionaires who fund me. I'll vote the interests of the businesses that lobby me. I'm an old-fashioned Republican, and he's being pushed out by Republicans who believe that there's a worldwide Jewish conspiracy, and that Democrats want to drink the blood of children, which of course was borrowed from the older worldwide Jewish conspiracy, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that Hitler rode to power, that was started in 1910 by the Tsar's secret police, and it's like the crazies have taken over enough of the party that one of their own became president of the United States. And, well over 100 of their own, probably over 150 of their own, are in the House and Senate right now. Not to mention state houses all over the country. I mean, the Republican Party of Arizona reelected this crazy woman. I don't have the article right in front of me, but I shouldn't call her a crazy woman, but let's say a radical in that camp, in the conspiracy camp, as the new chair of the party.
Yeah. Well, you remember Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin was the political arm of the IRA. Now, you can debate all the Irish politics all you want, but is the Republican Party going to become is the Republican Party going to become the political arm of some sort of overthrow the last most powerful democracy on the earth? Look, the effects of the Trump administration, I know we don't want to talk about it, but it's true. We're going to feel the detriment of that in 20 or 30 years. I mean, this is going to go on for a really long time, and unless we get a handle on this. All right, and I'm afraid we're going down the path of Afghanistan and Iraq, where we may not be able to get a handle on it. I don't know. I mean, the Taliban's supposedly a legitimate political party,
The problem, in my opinion, or a large part of the problem, is the propaganda media system that they have, which includes social media, Facebook and Twitter, particularly Facebook, and then Fox News and all these other right-wing networks and right-wing hate radio. It's like they just feel like, hey, we can just do anything. It's crazy. Dave, thank you for the call. The irresponsibility on that side is shocking.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And they claim to be patriots. Back with more. Oh, and Louis DeJoy, I got to tell you about this after the break, and then I'll continue picking up your phone calls. Stick around.
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scott poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, a liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap and trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that y'all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, the hidden history of the billionaires behind the rise of the radical right, by Jane Mayer.
You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for folks who support our program. It's about a growing movement, oddly enough, on the hard right, on the far fringe extreme right, that says that because Congress, after the Civil War, had not seated senators and members of the House from the former Confederate states and refused to until they changed their state constitutions to eliminate slavery, because they did not have a say in the writing and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that ended slavery, gave equal protection under the law to everybody, and guaranteed the right to vote to formerly enslaved people, that because the Confederate states were not represented, these are illegitimate amendments. And oddly, one of the people who's at the forefront of this is Amy Coney Barrett. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Okay, one last thing I wanted to mention, and then I'll get to your phone calls here. Howard Dean tweeted over the weekend that Louis DeJoy can and should be fired, and now sooner rather than later. DeJoy is a civil servant, and I don't know the status of the Postal Board of Governors, but I'm of the opinion, and Howard Dean is not the only person saying this. He's one of the more high-profile people being quoted as saying this, but that even if you have civil service protections, if somebody can demonstrate that you are doing your job incompetently or destructively, you can be fired for cause. And in my opinion, Joe Biden should fire Louis DeJoy for cause today, and he should strip out, I believe there's 8 members of the Postal Board of Governors. All of them were appointed by Donald Trump, and I believe these are 10-year positions. They need to go too. We need our post office back, and Congress needs to act to hand back to the post office, once it's no longer in the hands of Louis DeJoy and his 8 Republican guys who all want to privatize the post office and give it to FedEx or UPS, probably FedEx because it's a non-union operation. We not only need to take it away from them, but then give back that roughly $50 billion that's sitting in the trust fund of the post office to pay for the health insurance of people who retire 75 years from 2005, which is 60 years from now. It's nuts, right? They're sitting on $50 billion to pay for health insurance 60 years from now, when there won't even be health insurance. By then, we'll certainly have a single-payer system because it's the most efficient, the least expensive, and the most effective. And if anything has proven that, it's this pandemic. Look at every other country in the world has their act together when it comes to vaccinating people, when it comes to keeping track of who's sick and who's not, when it comes to just the whole thing. And why are we not? Well, we have no national health care system. We have, it seems, no national nothing. So, anyhow. Oh, and the last thing. On Friday, I told you that today the article of impeachment for insurrection, promoting insurrection, is going to be transmitted to the United States Senate, and that therefore the Senate trial would start today. Well, the ceremony around the Senate trial begins today. The article will be exhibited today the 25th. Tomorrow, the Senate will issue a summons to Donald Trump to appear before the court. He has until February 2nd to respond to the impeachment's pretrial briefs, in other words, to lay out his defense. And then on February 8th, the House can rebut his rebuttal. And then on February 9th, the actual trial will begin. There's a lot of work that needs to be done between now and then, but so that's the schedule. That's the plan. Sharon in Minneapolis. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Hi. What's on my mind is I think the people who participated in that insurgent, as they round them up, they should take them to Guantanamo Bay because they are treasonous and they're terrorists. And
the people who were chanting "Hang Mike Pence," the people who built that gallows, and we still have, to the best of my knowledge, no idea who built the gallows, which is bizarre. You'd think that there's at least security cameras out there. I'm not a fan of Guantanamo, and I don't think anybody should be there. I think the whole thing is illegal. But those are the people to whom the book should really be thrown. I mean, the people who are not just advocating insurrection, not just advocating a violent overthrow of our government, but were specifically acting in an attempt to murder Vice President Pence and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. And they were explicit about it. They were clear about it. They were bragging about it. They were chanting about it. Back to you, Sharon.
I think the people that were in that room that didn't put on their protective mask, that might have been a way for them to identify themselves from the Democrats. If the Democrats had on masks, they were a target.
There were no Democrats in that crowd, Sharon. The Democrats did not want to stop the certification of Joe Biden as president.
In that one room where they were saying that.
You're talking about when Congress went and they went into lockdown, and then Steve Scalise, the number 2 Republican in the House, the guy who campaigned in Louisiana on a slogan of David Duke without the hood. Steve Scalise was sitting there with this big grin on his face, refusing to wear a mask, and then he had a whole bunch of Republicans sitting around him like, yeah, we're with our leader, Steve Scalise. Yeah, he's David Duke without the hood, and we're not going to wear no damn mask. I mean, it was disgusting. Yeah, I'm with you. Sharon, thank you for the call. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's up?
Hey, afternoon, Tom. You guys are all touching on pieces and aspects, but nobody's putting it all together. It's not that there's a spell being cast on these Arizona and other state Republicans that are taking action against their own. They're keeping an eye on the events very closely, and they're adding notes to their playbook in addition to vigorous voter suppression as the GOP strategy point 1. They're seeing now that there is upgrading and updating to be done to that strategy. The Supreme Court on this emoluments decision, that means, and this is something we've all talked about for years on your show, Tom, what if the Trump figure next time was less of a bumbling fool and was more competent, maybe had been through law school and things like that? So they're gearing up, knowing that emoluments is never going to be a problem for anybody they want to put in there, including a Koch-type figure. Additionally, this, worry all of a sudden that we're going to flood the courts, which, by the way, had a lot of vacancies until Mitch McConnell finally opened the floodgate when he got the president of his choosing. But a diminishment in desire to see any of these people prosecuted. Do you find it odd, Tom, how none of us have heard the term cop killer? Because any time a cop gets killed anywhere in America for any reason, there is a swarming of police from surrounding jurisdictions. I'll work overtime. I'll work for free. Cop killer, cop killer. We're not hearing any of that language this time. And then finally,
right, and there's 2 dead cops.
Yeah, and there's no crying out. And you commented earlier, and the number I'm sure is going to grow. We're finding just what percentage of this mob was comprised of current and former police, current and former military. So there's always been, a white supremacist Christian identity cult group that's in our military and in our police. I mean, just see the large group you noted earlier from Pennsylvania, and then all the way over in Los Angeles. We know that police department from the Rampart scandal and times after. They have their own individual. I forget his name. Was a black guy cop, and he got kind of screwed over by the system, out of his job, and he went ballistic. Remember, Eric something?
Yeah, I do.
You know the
I'm
case.
sorry, I don't recall the name, but yeah.
Yeah, but the point is, they're seeing, and lastly, they know that they've got a golden 60-day period between Election Day and electoral vote count day in early January to have complete purge-like lawlessness. If the election doesn't go the way they like, they've got this other option for 2 months to try some other techniques and know that there's not going to really be a vigorous outcry for law enforcement and prosecution, for impeachment of whoever's sitting. You basically get no holds barred, no rules. We're gonna disregard the law. If you can make a play for a coup, as long as you execute it within those 60 days, win, lose, or draw, you're okay. I mean, this is strategy for them. We're gonna, if it's Trump himself in 24 or a Trump dubbed candidate of a younger age, we're going to repeat this if we don't seriously prosecute everybody.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I've been making this point for years on this program, Eric, that it took total defeat to crush the cult of Nazism. It took total defeat to crush the cult of Tojoism and fascism in Japan after World War II. And when we didn't totally defeat the cult of the lost cause in the South, we ended up with 100 years of Jim Crow and legal segregation in the United States, a repudiation of Lincoln's efforts. I mean, you've got to crush the movement.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Or more correctly said, you have to hold the criminals to account, or they will commit future crimes. And welcome back. Mark in Costa Mesa, California. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call again. I appreciate it.
Sure.
I think that Trump is clearly, I don't understand why he's clearly guilty and part of this insurrection in D.C. And I think that he should be put in either solitary confinement, imprisonment, or else house arrest until he's gone through court, because his voice is everybody that was there in D.C. Washington D.C. 1-6 was the safest place in the world, but now that the fences are down, or I don't know exactly what the situation is now, but now Trump is he's going, oh, I'm going to start my own political, my own political party. He's just going on and on. But if he has a voice, he now has Democrats and Republicans who, after this, who are out with their families and out in public life, their lives are in grave danger because of Trump's voice. And I think that he shouldn't be allowed to use his voice. He's used it enough. Several times during his presidency, there have been things that have happened, and those people were followers of him, and they were going after people that he didn't like. but nobody was really pinpointing on him. That's all I want to say about that. But I just have one more briefly. I predict.
Well, before you move on to one more thing, Mark, I can't agree with you. We have free speech in this country. The government can't stifle free speech, shouldn't be able to stifle free speech, no matter how reprehensible it may be. And Donald Trump has the right and should continue to have the right to speak. Private corporations like Twitter and Facebook can choose whether or not to offer him a platform for that speech. But it's not the role of government to do that until somebody has been convicted of a crime. Now, Donald Trump is facing the possibility of criminal convictions in a bunch of different courtrooms, both federal and state. And there's widespread speculation that he has issued a self-pardon and that he has issued secret pardons for his family members and maybe even some of his other cronies that they will pull out of their back pocket should charges be filed against them. But they just didn't want the heat of the glare of publicity at the time. And that may be the case. We'll see how that shakes out. But I just don't think, putting somebody in jail and preventing them from speaking before they've had their day in court is the American way, Mark, respectfully.
I was just thinking in terms of his past, especially like 1/6 now. It's all plain clearly in front of us.
Oh, I get that he's the guy who yells fire in a crowded theater, and he should be held to account for that. But he should not be imprisoned or silenced until he's had due process. Until he's had an opportunity to confront his accusers and have a jury rule on his fate. I suspect that's where you're going. Yeah. Okay. Mark, thanks a lot for the call. I'm hitting the break here, so I got to run. But thank you so much. It is coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. In just 1 minute, we'll be back with more of your calls. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Right here. Stick around. We'll be right back. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. So remember back in 2020 when in California, Uber and Lyft were pouring all kinds of money into Prop 22, which basically would allow them to continue claiming that their drivers weren't actually employers of Uber. They were actually contract workers. They were all independent small businesses. And therefore, the company didn't have to pay for unemployment insurance, didn't have to pay for workman's compensation if somebody got injured, didn't have to offer them any health insurance. In fact, basically couldn't even do it. And there's a whole bunch of other benefits that are associated and protections that you actually get, state and federal protections that you get as an employee that you do not have available to you as a contractor. Well, it passed because of millions of dollars from Uber, and now the fallout is happening. Companies across California are starting to fire their workers and telling them, we'll hire you back. I give examples in our new video over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. 9 minutes before the hour. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yes, thanks, Tom. Well, I concur with some of the previous callers, but in addition, for an additional reason that hasn't been mentioned, and that goes back to a previous caller, I guess his name was Steve, who thought that the Capitol rioters were Democrats. He offered no evidence, and he said, I just believe that. Well, right. What we need, in the same way that the Nuremberg trials help the German people recognize and acknowledge the atrocities of the Hitler regime, the Third Reich. These people who are Trump supporters, they need to have a faith-saving way to change what they believe and help them believe the truth. And that would be possible. You see, you don't have to. You have to prosecute as many people as can be identified, but not all of them have to go to trial, because you can offer them a plea bargain, which says that, and as you said earlier, is that now they're saying, oh, Donald Trump told me to do this. Well, that's great. You're a great witness for a criminal trial against Donald Trump. So we can offer you a a plea bargain, say no jail time. You plead guilty. You are on probation. You get a suspended sentence for which term you'd be on probation, and you agree to say in court what it was that Donald Trump said that encouraged you to go do what you did at the Capitol. And that's how...
Yeah, let him turn state's evidence.
Exactly. That's how that leaves people who are stubbornly wanting to believe something that isn't true a way out. It lets them save face and say, okay, now I see the evidence. And now there are people who actually did it, saying that, yeah, Donald Trump told me to do it, and I did it, and I was being prosecuted, and that's why I'm, testifying on behalf of the state. That's the way it's done.
Yeah. And those people who are willing to come forward and say, yes, I was brainwashed. Here's who I believed. Here's what they said. Here's how I know that it's now that I know. Here's how I now know it is not true and was not true. I am with you. And I think that some of these trials will reveal even more of this. The problem is, once again, I mean, we saw it this weekend. Rand Paul was on George Stephanopoulos' show on, I think, ABC. And he continued to say, there's voter fraud in America. I mean, what is it going to take? George W. Bush spent 2.5 years, $74 million, and all 100 federal prosecutors looking for, quote, voter fraud. He found 31 cases of it over a 10-year period. Loyola University did a far more exhaustive study over almost a 15-year period, looked at over 1 billion individual votes, and they found 81 cases of voter fraud. It is... more people shoplift. You can't even make that comparison. There basically is no voter fraud. But this is the excuse they use to suppress the vote of black people, of Hispanic people, of students, and of Social Security voters. And they are not going to let go of this. You could see that on display with Rand Paul this weekend. They are not going to let go of this. And that's the big lie that I think really needs to be challenged. We just need to take it on head on.
Sure, and if they're going to say we need to investigate, see what they're being allowed to get away with, and I probably mentioned this before, is to essentially come to court without an opponent. And our system is an adversarial system. It's a common law adversarial system where if you're going to allege that signatures were not verified, then you have to say that city clerk or that county clerk didn't verify these ballots. You have to have some, and right. You have to give that person a chance to say, yes, I did. You can't just go into court without an opponent and say something's fishy in here and expect the courts to say, oh, yeah, you're right about that. Because that's
why they threw out 60 cases.
That's exactly what they say they decry. And that's why why the judges have thrown these out. The judges have thrown them out because they don't have an opponent. They're not accusing anybody of defraud. If there's fraud, Tom, there has to be a perpetrator and a victim, and they're not saying who is. They're not identifying either one.
Right. No, it's a straw man argument, Paul. Spot on. Yeah. Paul, thank you. Well said as always. Marcus in Chicago. Hey, Marcus, what's up?
Hey, when black athletes were kneeling to protest racial indiscretions here in this country, they were called traitors. They were disrespecting the police, disrespecting the military. Some of those same people, I'm sure, were in that melee, that riot at the Capitol, beating.
You mean the people who were all flipped out about Colin Kaepernick?
Flag. Yes, they were beating police with that same flag. They killed police with that same flag. Some of those same people who berated those athletes were kneeling because they wanted racial and justice, equality. I don't hear that outrage now. I don't hear anyone,
No, you won't. I mean, this is a white supremacist movement, Marcus. I mean, that's the bottom line. It is, and occasionally somebody will call it out on TV. Joanne Reed has done a particularly good job of that over on MSNBC. But this is a white supremacist movement, period, full stop. That is the core foundation of it and has been since the founding of our republic. We fought a civil war over this. Marcus, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
You can't poke into any issue in
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.
Our book today is In Defense of Public Service by Cedric L. Alexander. The subtitle is How 22 Million Government Workers Will Save Our Republic. This is from Chapter 1, Civil Servants and Servant Leaders. Unelected public servants are found at all levels of government, federal, state, and local. But the modern model for all is found in the federal employment systems. More specifically, it is in the concept and operation of the federal civil service system, which governs the appointment and tenure of most federal workers. Those who believe that the unelected federal bureaucracy is a deep state covertly dedicated to the overthrow of elected government see the civil service as a fundamentally unconstitutional innovation, a monster of very recent creation. Such demonizing mythology aside, the truth is that the origin of the unelected government is found in the Constitution, under Section 2 of Article 2. The article defines the powers of the executive branch, and the second paragraph of its Section 2 assigns to the President the power to, quote, nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law. End quote. Thus, the President has the power to make all appointments not otherwise provided for in the Constitution. These are subject to the Senate's advice and consent unless Congress, by law, vests the appointment of such inferior officers as they may think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. End quote. In other words, the unelected government, which I have called the fourth branch, is rooted in the Constitution through the powers that it grants either to the President or to Congress. In turn, Congress may grant the President, the courts, or heads of departments the power to hire unelected public servants. In all cases, however, the creation of the unelected government flows from the Constitution, the supreme authority and originating law of the nation. The framers of the Constitution recognized that the elected government of our republic was not in itself sufficient to govern us. It cannot alone get government done. It does not alone possess all the expertise necessary to lead, let alone manage, so vast an enterprise as a nation. If this was true in the late 18th century, it's even truer in the 21st century geopolitical and technological environment that is far more complex, and that therefore requires a cadre of professionals possessing a wide variety of specialized skills, training, education, and experience. The Constitution does not call these appointments and hires a fourth branch, but that is what the federal service and other government workers constitute. De jure, in law, there is no fourth branch of U.S. government, yet it unquestionably exists de facto, in practice, in reality, in fact. Does the fourth branch compete with the three constitutionally established branches? No. It coexists with them as provided for in Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution itself. Those three constitutional branches are absolutely necessary to our republic, but they are not sufficient to it, as the framers acknowledged. Moreover, as I've already observed, for most people, most of the time, and in most situations, it is the member of the fourth branch who are, practically speaking, the government. They are the doers. They implement the policies created and interpreted by the three constitutional branches. What is more, although they do not decide or decree policy, they often influence it, not covertly, but by intention and design. The Constitution assigns the Senate the roles of advising on and consenting to most major presidential appointments, but members of the fourth branch do far more advising on a daily basis when it comes to providing the subject matter expertise and feedback necessary to formulate and modify policy decisions. As it turned out, following the coming into effect of the Constitution in 1789, the President, the chief executive, that is, the elected official responsible for faithfully executing the laws, directly or indirectly appointed the unelected personnel whom he deemed necessary to execute government. Most of the agencies in which personnel of the unelected government served were created by the executive branch under Article 2. And for a full 170 years after the Constitution was ratified, the President had the unquestioned authority to appoint and to terminate what were, in effect, employees of his branch, the executive branch. Indeed, in 1789, Congress explicitly voted, by a narrow margin, that it had no authority of approval or disapproval of presidential decisions to terminate appointees. Only those few public positions that were independent of the executive branch, which today are known as independent agencies, were not subject to presidential appointment or termination. In 1829, Andrew Jackson took office as the 7th President of the United States. He was regarded as the apostle of the rights of the common man, and he made it clear that he intended to usher in an area of a more highly participatory democracy. During his 2 terms and under his influence, many states substantially extended the still males-only franchise by dropping property requirements from the ballot, and Johnson waged a mighty battle against the Second Bank of the United States in a successful effort to loosen credit and thereby free up sources for finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander. Frank.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just 10 billionaires made enough money during the pandemic to vaccinate every single human being on planet Earth, and they would still have more money left over than they had before the pandemic. This is amazing. Nick Hanauer is on the line with us, the entrepreneur, co-founder, and partner of Second Avenue Partners. His website, Nick Hanauer, HANAUER.com. And Nick, and also Nick Hanauer is his Twitter handle. Nick, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we talked. How are you? I'm good. You know, and I think my situation is probably similar to much of middle class America. The majority of my wealth is tied up in my home, and every year I have to pay a tax on that wealth, on basically my money bin, you know, on the store of wealth that is my wealth, and it's called a property tax. And and I also pay it on the other piece of property I have, my car. And I don't get it why billionaires don't have to pay a property tax or a wealth tax on their money bins the way that, probably, I think 68% of Americans own their own homes. 68% of Americans are paying a wealth tax every year. And those who rent are paying it indirectly by, because it's built into their rent. Why don't billionaires have to do that?
Well, I mean, is the answer 45 years of neoliberal economic policy sufficient for you?
Yeah, but it's a little wonky. You want to boil that down?
Well, I mean, you raise, I think, a really important issue, which is why. I mean, the straight up answer to your question is because we have an economic system and a tax system built by people like me for people like me. And
as a rich guy,
and obviously there are a lot of ways in which wealthy citizens used to pay, used to contribute more to the society than we do now, and that sort of relentless downward pressure on, sort of downward force on the amount of help we give the society is a consequence of a bunch of really bad economic ideas. But I mean, I think that straight up, you're right that we have to find ways to equalize it. And certainly a common sense way to think about it is if most middle class people are already paying effectively a property tax, a wealth tax on their property, why don't people who have assets that are greater than one home paying the same tax? And it's a really good question. And obviously, if we did, things would be a lot fairer and a lot better for most people.
This is largely the case in most of the rest of the developed world, isn't it? I haven't done a country by country survey, but I know that England for a long time had a wealth tax. I think they might have gotten rid of it with the Thatcher government. I'm not sure, but do you know the history?
Wealth taxes. I don't. I'm not a domain expert in the wealth tax. There have been places where wealth taxes have been used. And France is, I think, a good example where I think they did not implement it in a particularly effective way. And obviously, income is quite easy to measure. Wealth is slightly harder in many, many cases. What is a private business worth, for example? What if I have a painting? What is that worth? It's just slightly more complicated. But I think, Tom, what I think is really important is that you're raising, the meta issue, which is why is it that let me just tick off a couple of examples. Why is it that middle class people pay up to about a 38 or 39% tax on their income, but wealthy people who make dividends or capital gains as income pay only 20%? Like, what the hell? Like, what kind of sense does that make? Here's an even more egregious example. Why is it that middle-class people who earn up to about $140,000 pay effectively 12.5% of their income in payroll taxes, but people who make $20 million a year, for which that first $140,000 is de minimis, actually doesn't matter, pay 0% payroll tax on 99.9% of their income? Right? Like,
right.
How does that make sense?
Well, it doesn't this, Nick Hanauer, doesn't this demonstrate the problem of having politically active billionaires being given by the Supreme Court in 76 in the Buckley decision, 78 in the Bellotti decision, 2010 in Citizens United, given carte blanche to basically buy politicians and own them?
Yeah, for sure. And, you and I both agree that, radical inequality is toxic to economies and democracies, not least of which because it is a self-reinforcing feedback loop, right? The richer I get, the more influence I have. The more influence I have, the more I can bend the rules, the norms, and the policies to make myself even richer and more powerful. And today, the United States is largely a plutocracy, right, where the voices of the few and the wealthy, drown out, the voices of the majority. And that is, look, and there are all sorts of ways to see how deleterious that is, this insane semi-revolution we had a few weeks ago being just one tiny example of how the country can come off the rails if most people don't feel like the country is operating in their interest. So,
right, Nick, we just have 2 minutes until we hit a hard break here. I had somebody call into the show the other day and said, what about a maximum income? We have minimum income. Why not have a maximum income? And I pointed out the UK had that in 1776, and it was to prevent the emergence of a middle class. But we functionally had that with a top tax rate of 91% and 74% when Reagan came into office. And that's why CEOs typically never took more than $3 million a year until the mid-1980s. Isn't it time to reconsider rolling back not just the Trump tax cuts and the Bush tax cuts, but also the Reagan tax cuts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I don't think that a maximum income is practical, but taxing great wealth at high levels, both to raise revenue, but also just to renorm the society and pull it closer, pull everyone closer together, I think is a very, very important thing. And I will admit that my mind has changed over time about this. I didn't used to think that the distance between the bottom and the top was something that we should worry about. But I now feel very strongly that isn't the case, that it actually does matter, that it is possible for somebody at the bottom to get to the top. And if it's too far apart, it's not practical. So that's my view.
Wilkerson and Pickett have done some brilliant research on this with the Equality Trust out of the UK that as inequality increases, all kinds of social ills. Teenage pregnancy goes up as a result of inequality.
Mental health, everything else like that. And that's because people have to recognize that humans are social creatures. And if you stretch the society apart, most people feel like they're failures.
Yep. Nick Hanauer, co-founder and partner with Second Avenue Partners, Pitchfork Economics. NickHanauer.com is the website. Nick, thanks, and at Nick Hanauer on Twitter. Nick, thanks a lot for dropping by. It's great talking. It's always great talking to you. Thank you.
Good to talk to you, Tom.
Have a great afternoon. Yep, thank you. Back at you. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. More of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Talk media for the sane among us. There's a few crazy people who call too. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Al in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Al, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, sir? I think right now, Democrats can't wait weeks and weeks to gain Republican support to pass COVID-19 relief. And I think we should start using the, either the reconciliation process to avoid the filibuster or just to start eliminating the filibuster altogether. Because right now, everything from infrastructure, cybersecurity, bringing jobs back to America, improving our healthcare system, community revitalization, overturning Citizens United. Right now, we are struggling. I am struggling. Most Americans can't wait for this guy to be impeached. Let the Southern District of New York do their job. Congress's job is to pass bills. Right now, we need legislation to get passed. We need to either get rid of the filibuster or do a massive, bold, progressive piece of legislation, like a Grand New Deal of some sort, through the process of reconciliation. Because, Tom, I'm struggling a lot. My neighbors are struggling. People cannot. They're either facing evictions, or they're drowning in debt, or they're struggling with the COVID crisis. We cannot wait for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Or all of the above.
You know what I mean? This is just This is silly. Right now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the filibuster is, it did not exist prior to the 1840s. And the filibuster was brought about. John C. Calhoun was the big advocate for the filibuster. He was John Quincy Adams's vice president. They hated each other. John C. Calhoun was an advocate for slavery. John Quincy Adams was so vigorously opposed to slavery that after he left the White House, he ran for the House of Representatives and won, just so that every day he could bring up the issue of slavery on the floor of the House after the House of Representatives had passed a law forbidding it. But John C. Calhoun then went on to be the vice president under Andrew Jackson. And as Jackson's vice president, he basically kickstarted the whole Confederate political movement that ended in the Civil War. And the filibuster was used then and has been used ever since then, mostly to keep, quote, black people in their place, to use the language of John C. Calhoun. Whether it's opposing welfare programs, whether it's opposing voting rights, whether it's opposing, basically anything that's going to benefit large quantities of Americans, which would include minorities. Right. So-called conservatives in the Senate have used the filibuster.
I was going to talk about restoring the Voting Rights Act. There are so many things that we are facing right now, just a multiple amount of things that we need to overcome. So, especially overturning Citizens United, this stuff just cannot wait. I don't know if you agree or not.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And in fact, it's going to be dealing with the filibuster is going to be at the core of my main rant in my first hour tomorrow. Louise and I were talking about that this morning as we were, kind of looking at setting up our week, because, right now, Mitch McConnell is filibustering Chuck Schumer's attempt to organize committees in the Senate. So right now, the Senate can't do business because Mitch McConnell is running a filibuster as we speak. He's out of power, and yet he's running the Senate. Mitch McConnell is. It's insane. I'm with you, Al. I'm absolutely with you. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. Stick around. We'll be right back. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for folks who are supporting the program about how big pharma, the big pharmaceutical companies, might be the lever that the healthcare industry uses to destroy Medicare for all, or even a public option as we move into and toward the Biden administration. And how do they do that? Well, they're spending $30 billion a year on advertising. The United States is the only country in the world, the only developed country in the world, that allows drug companies to advertise with very, very few restrictions on television. Only one other country, New Zealand, allows any kind of drug advertising on television. But in the United States, the door is largely wide open. And as a result, all of the television networks are hooked on money from big pharma and big health, as it were. You can check out all the details over at thomhartmann.com with our new video for the supporters of our program. Thank you. Welcome back, Roger in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Roger, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I asked you online, but I haven't been able to keep up with the clip here. But I'm just wondering if you could just explain your opinion, beliefs on pushing for a domestic terrorism bill and why you felt that it's not a good idea.
Sure. Broadly speaking, I mean, if you go back and you look at the debates around the Patriot Act, or arguably the non-debate around the Patriot Act in 2001 and early 2002, the Patriot Act allowed the federal government to go beyond what the Constitution provides in terms of protections of due process. And the argument that was made was, well, we're not doing this for American citizens. These powers will only be powers that the government can use overseas. In other words, we can violate our own core principles when we do it to foreign actors, when we do it to terrorists in Afghanistan, you know, bin Laden and his buddies. And so Americans kind of swallowed hard and went along with that. If we were to pass domestic terrorism legislation, just that word terrorism now has, as a consequence of a whole bunch of laws that have been passed, mostly since 2001, but some of them go back all the way to the 60s. Actually, some of them go back to the late 19th century, and they were used mostly against the civil rights movement. But when you designate somebody a terrorist or a group as a terrorist group under federal law, they lose a whole bunch of rights. And I'm all in favor of tracking down and finding groups of American citizens who are trying to overthrow our government, who are trying to foster racial violence, who are trying to, you know, the things that we're actually seeing happen right in front of us. But to use the tools of the so-called war on terror that go beyond, that basically suspend our constitutional rights, in my opinion, is a very dangerous thing. I would have a fairly moderate to high level of confidence that a Biden administration, for example, would not abuse those tools. But if Josh Hawley or Tom Cotton became president, I'm guessing, Roger, that you and I would both be labeled domestic terrorists and they'd be all over us. So that's why I don't think we should do that.
Yeah, I hear that. But, you know, so what do you suggest, though? You know, the thing, like people like Frank Figliuzzi, you know, former FBI agent who I listen to on MSNBC, and other counterterrorism experts, he personally had said that we should get a domestic terrorist bill. But the problem being, you know, and with what's happening is now a lot of these Capitol insurrectionists, they're being, what a lot of us are saying, prematurely released from prison. And they're not being tried to the fullest extent of the law. And, you know, people like Frank Figliuzzi are saying if we had the bill on the books, we could streamline the whole process and really go after these white supremacists, nationalists, militias.
You know, conspiracy to commit an insurrection, Roger, is already a 20-year federal felony. It's not that we don't have laws that can be used against these people. It's that we have prosecutors, and I think in many cases prosecutors who consider themselves right-wing Republicans, because that's very common among police and prosecutors, who are unwilling to use those laws. If I was going to make any change in our laws, I would update the RICO statute. The racketeering influence and corrupt organization law, the RICO law, is very narrowly tailored to go after the mafia. And with half a dozen relatively modest tweaks that would not blow up our constitutional rights. It's basically an anti-conspiracy law, right? It's that an organization has turned from being a legitimate organization, a public interest group or an advocacy group, into a criminal enterprise, and it's very difficult right now. Well, it's very difficult to do that, and that's the problem, because the RICO laws are so narrowly tailored for organized crime, that it's very difficult to use them on these circumstances. And so that's the one area where I would have some give in my wariness of giving the government more power. But, I mean, remember the FBI tracked Martin Luther King around for years and years and finally discovered him having an affair, recorded it, and sent him the recording and said, commit suicide, or we're going to send this to your wife. I mean, that's government power can be a dangerous, destructive thing. Now, that was done outside of government power, but that kind of behavior we don't ever want to sanction. But I think that the conspiracy laws, grounded in the RICO statutes, could be updated to include political violence. It would have to be violence. That would have to be the key to the whole thing. But again, be very, very careful, because you get Josh Hawley as president in 4 years, or Tom Cotton, And they're going to take that law and they're going to point it right at Black Lives Matter. And you know it as well as I do. So we've got to be,
Thank you, Tom.
In every case, thank you, Roger. In every case, we've got to look at how can this law be used, and more importantly, how can it be abused? Because inevitably it will be. We'll be back.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Stick around. We'll be.
Our book today is Midnight in Chernobyl, the untold story of the world's greatest nuclear disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m. Chernobyl. Our book today is In Defense of Public Service by Cedric L. Alexander. The subtitle is How 22 Million Government Workers Will Save Our Republic. This is from Chapter 1, Civil Servants and Servant Leaders. Unelected public servants are found at all levels of government, federal, state, and local. But the modern model for all is found in the federal employment systems. More specifically, it is in the concept and operation of the federal civil service system, which governs the appointment and tenure of most federal workers. Those who believe that the unelected federal bureaucracy is a deep state covertly dedicated to the overthrow of elected government see the civil service as a fundamentally unconstitutional innovation, a monster of very recent creation. Such demonizing mythology aside, the truth is that the origin of the unelected government is found in the Constitution, under Section 2 of Article 2. The article defines the powers of the executive branch, and the second paragraph of its Section 2 assigns to the President the power to, quote, nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. End quote. Thus, the President has the power to make all appointments not otherwise provided for in the Constitution. These are subject to the Senate's advice and consent unless Congress, by law, vests the appointment of such inferior officers as they may think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. End quote. In other words, the unelected government, which I have called the fourth branch, is rooted in the Constitution through the powers that it grants either to the President or to Congress. In turn, Congress may grant the President, the courts, or heads of departments the power to hire unelected public servants. In all cases, however, the creation of the unelected government flows from the Constitution, the supreme authority and originating law of the nation. The framers of the Constitution recognized that the elected government of our republic was not in itself sufficient to govern us. It cannot alone get government done. It does not alone possess all the expertise necessary to lead, let alone manage, so vast an enterprise as a nation. If this was true in the late 18th century, it's even truer in the 21st century geopolitical and technological environment that is far more complex, and that therefore requires a cadre of professionals possessing a wide variety of specialized skills, training, education, and experience. The Constitution does not call these appointments and hires a fourth branch, but that is what the federal service and other government workers constitute. De jure, in law, there is no fourth branch of U.S. government, yet it unquestionably exists de facto, in practice, in reality, in fact. Does the fourth branch compete with the three constitutionally established branches? No. It coexists with them as provided for in Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution itself. Those three constitutional branches are absolutely necessary to our republic, but they are not sufficient to it, as the framers acknowledged. Moreover, as I've already observed, for most people, most of the time, and in most situations, it is the member of the fourth branch who are, practically speaking, the government. They are the doers. They implement the policies created and interpreted by the three constitutional branches. What is more, although they do not decide or decree policy, they often influence it, not covertly, but by intention and design. The Constitution assigns the Senate the roles of advising on and consenting to most major presidential appointments, but members of the fourth branch do far more advising on a daily basis when it comes to providing the subject matter expertise and feedback necessary to formulate and modify policy decisions. As it turned out, following the coming into effect of the Constitution in 1789, the president, the chief executive, that is the elected official responsible for faithfully executing the laws, directly or indirectly appointed the unelected personnel whom he deemed necessary to execute government. Most of the agencies in which personnel of the unelected government served were created by the executive branch under Article 2. And for a full 170 years after the Constitution was ratified, the president had the unquestioned authority to appoint and to terminate what were, in effect, employees of his branch, the executive branch. Indeed, in 1789, Congress explicitly voted, by a narrow margin, that it had no authority of approval or disapproval of presidential decisions to terminate appointees. Only those few public positions that were independent of the executive branch, which today are known as independent agencies, were not subject to presidential appointment or termination. In 1829, Andrew Jackson took office as the 7th president of the United States. He was regarded as the apostle of the rights of the common man, and he made it clear that he intended to usher in an area of a more highly participatory democracy. During his 2 terms and under his influence, many states substantially extended the still males-only franchise by dropping property requirements from the ballot, and Johnson waged a mighty battle against the Second Bank of the United States in a successful effort to loosen credit and thereby free up sources for finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander.
Officers, the last year we have statistics for is 2017, so we'll use that. The 100 police officers were killed by firearms during that year. Now, some were suicides, some were accidental shootings. A few of them were bad guys killing cops. 100. 1,000 of our soldiers all around the world were shot dead in 2017. 1,000. A little more dangerous, apparently, to be a soldier than to be a cop. But apparently, the most dangerous position in the United States is not being a police officer on the front lines. It's not being a soldier on the front lines of combat. It's being a child. School-aged children killed by firearms in 2017, 2,462 of them. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com about this situation and what we can do about it. You can check it out there. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, the place where smart people get their news. Lynx in Bremerton, Washington. Hey, Lynx, what's up?
Well, I just wanted to add my feelings on the Justice Department not prosecuting fully all of the people that were involved in the insurrection. And my feeling is that Trump spent 4 years of his administration normalizing violence through his rhetoric. And by not prosecuting all of these people, what they did was a violent insurrection and defilement of the people's house. So all of these indignant white supremacists are going to feel validated that what they did was no big deal, and possibly even worse, that what they did was necessary and justified. And so by not holding them to account, we are further normalizing violence in this country, which is highly disturbing to me. The other thing is when Jordan said, do you have a functioning First Amendment when cancel culture only allows one side to talk? But what was left unsaid was that the speech that was being suppressed was an incitement to riot from the president, an insurrection of his supporters fueled by QAnon conspiracies and lies about voter fraud and calls for violence. The issue for Jordan was not talk, but murder. And the white supremacist movement really is the ultimate cancel culture. And that's something that the Republicans refuse to own. And they've wrapped themselves in the Confederate flag. and they need to own that. And that's what I have to add.
Yeah, I'm with you, Lynx, and very well said. Thank you. Rick in Cartersville, Georgia. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to get your opinion on something other that I think could be something other that could be pursued. In the first impeachment proceedings, that, I would, of course, naturally he was acquitted, and the fact that certainly I think you could say that particularly the proceedings in the Senate was pretty much a sham. It was, set up the fact that they weren't going to call any witnesses, they weren't going to do anything, almost a conspiracy from that standpoint. But also when you could couple that with the DOJ memo that apparently Mueller had to be working under, and the fact that removal from office through impeachment would be the only way that he could be prosecuted at that point in time, it would seem like the two coupled together could provide a case to say that all of the Republicans that were complicit in all that were actually aiding and abetting and could be charged in that case, and also possibly violating the oath of office. What do you think?
I think by and large you're right, Rick. I also think, though, that the ultimate white privilege, one dimension of white privilege, of course, or privilege in general, is wealth privilege and power privilege. And holding anybody in the United States Senate or House of Representatives seriously accountable for what has happened, while I'm all in favor of it, I think is extremely unlikely. I think it's incredibly unseemly that we're going to see co-conspirators with Donald Trump, specifically Cruz and Hawley, sitting in judgment of Donald Trump. It's like, hey, me and five guys robbed a bank. I want the 5 guys on my jury, please. It's just not how it's supposed to work. But I think you're right. And that memo that the Justice Department that the Nixon Justice Department came up with in order to prevent Richard Nixon from being charged with crimes. This is when not only was the Watergate stuff happening, but it had come out, or it was starting to come out, that Jimmy Hoffa had bribed him to the tune of $1 million, and that the milk lobby had bribed him. They literally walked into the White House with $500,000 in cash in a suitcase, in a briefcase, and left it for him. As that stuff was coming out, that's when Nixon had his Justice Department write a memo saying that you can't even investigate, much less prosecute, a sitting president because he's so busy, it's so important. And then when Bill Clinton was president and the Republicans were doing their witch hunt about him having an affair with Monica Lewinsky, who was a consenting adult, Bill Clinton had his Justice Department revisit that memo and say, yeah, we kind of agree. You can't prosecute a guy, while he's president. It was so self-serving in both cases, frankly, although it was far more egregious with Nixon. I'm frankly not, I don't care if my president has an affair. I'm guessing that probably 90% of all of our presidents have had affairs. We certainly know that at least half of them have, while in office. But things like incitement to insurrection, or self-enrichment, violations of the Emolument Clause, conspiring with a foreign government to become president. In this case, in Trump's case, it was Russia in 2016. He attempted to do it with Ukraine in 2020. When that got shot down, God only knows who else is in on this thing. And then when that didn't work, it was, hey, let's destroy the country. Let's have another civil war. I think there absolutely has to be accountability. Rick, thank you for the call. Jordan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Jordan. Eugene Goodman.
Yes. I would like to thank you for taking my call, Tom. I'd like to just point out something I noticed. Eugene Goodman is not only one of the best heroes in America, and we'll never be able to quantify what he actually saved, but an unintended consequence of a white supremacist being used in the insurrectionist is, I noticed when I was watching that video this weekend of Eugene protecting the Capitol, that racism saved America. And these insurrectionists...
Yeah, now, Jordan, let me just pause you for just a second for people who are listening and don't know what we're talking about. Eugene Goodman is the black Capitol Police officer who, as this white MAGA mob was coming up the stairs and heading toward the Senate and could have killed people. I mean, they were expressing murderous intent and heading toward the vice president and chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." He's the guy who said, no, follow me. We don't know his exact words, but it was videotaped, they're this way or whatever. And he got them to go in the opposite direction. He literally, I believe Eugene Goodman saved lives. And for that, he was recognized by being the fellow who accompanied our vice president up to the swearing-in ceremony, as I recall. Back to you, Jordan.
Absolutely. And if you watch that video, you'll notice that the unintended consequence of using white supremacists in an insurrection is they abandoned the whole plan once they saw a black guy. And the black guy infuriated him. Let's go get him. Who cares about the rest of the plan? So in one strange way, racism on January 6th saved America. I don't think I'll ever be able to say that again as a black man, but I noticed that, and you'll notice it if you watch the video again. With that perspective.
Oh, yeah. I think you're absolutely right, Jordan.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. And thanks for hanging out for a while to get it on the air. Brian in Charlotte, that was a good one. Brian in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, Brian, you have some thoughts on the post office?
Sure. Tom, the problem of the $50 billion being set aside for, 60 years is a prime example of how, Republicans use government to work against the will of the people. And it kind of reminds me of what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission did a few years back when they could no longer issue renewal or new licenses for nuke plants because of the government failing to provide a permanent solution for nuclear waste that they've been promising us since the 80s, right? So under George Bush,
since the 60s.
Yeah. So what they did just a few years ago, they passed a rule called the Waste Confidence Rule. And so what that said was, while no solution had been found or determined for nuclear waste, the Nuclear Waste Commission had confidence that the government would find a solution in the future, and that this confidence was equivalent to actually implementing a solution today. And so this action of the NRC allowed the environmental impact statements for all the permits to blow right over the nuclear waste requirements. So, it's just amazing how Republicans can figure out ways to logjam our country and work against us, even with an issue that, is going to be deadly for 10,000 years. I can't think of any.
And in every case, I'm sorry, Brian.
I can't think of any reason why the Democrats shouldn't use every power they have under the Constitution of this country to get this country straightened out and do it right now.
Amen. Chuck Schumer, grow a spine. Thank you, Brian. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I really want to hear Chuck Schumer take names and kick ass. Come on, quit being mild-mannered Chuck. Time to be Dangerous Charlie or something. And welcome back. Lewis in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Lewis, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, so my concern was I feel like we on the left have been doing just a terrible job at fighting disinformation. And I wanted to know what can we do about, like, forcing networks like CNN and MSNBC to do real journalism, to debunk every single lie that helps shape that helps create these extremists, and just do it more often in order for it to work.
Yeah. The problem, Lewis, is that if we pass a law saying that the news has to actually be news, then that puts the federal government in charge of deciding what is news. And if you'll recall, Donald Trump replaced everybody at the Voice of America, which for 60, 70, 80 years has been broadcasting news to the whole planet in dozens of languages, replaced them with Trump toadies who started spewing, conspiracy theory BS and singing the praises of Donald Trump and calling that news. And so, I don't see, and I'm in the media, right? and there's no doubt in my mind that if the Trump administration was able to say, you can't broadcast because what you're saying is not true, in our opinion, that they would have come after me too. It's sort of like the conversation we had about an hour ago about the domestic terrorism laws. They sound great in principle, and when they're used against the people who are clearly, abusing process and systems and a danger to the republic, it seems like a good thing. But, wait until you've got Donald Trump or Josh Hawley or Tom Cotton or Ted Cruz as president, and you will see those laws turned against you, and perhaps in a way that this country can't recover from.
I don't mean necessarily like in a legal way. I mean just like getting them to actually report on certain things. Like, for example, when they were talking about Dominion voting machines, like I don't remember one segment on CNN that was dedicated to proving that Dominion voting machines actually worked. Didn't have any glitches. They would have done a way better job of convincing those other people, just by doing that. And like.
Well, it's hard to prove a negative, but I'm no fan of any voting machines, period. I think that all the votes should be on paper, like we have here in Oregon. But that said, ultimately that's going to be sorted out in the marketplace. What we're seeing is more and more of these right-wing network, One American News and Newsmax, competing with Fox. I just don't know how long it's going to last. I really believe that America is starting to wake up to how dangerous and toxic these guys are. The election in 2 years is going to tell us an awful lot about that, but I think that's happening. And the groups that are actually providing news are getting good audiences. I mean, CNN's ratings right now are better than they've ever been.
Yeah.
I do agree with you, though, that fighting the disinformation, there is a tendency on the part of many newsrooms to not want to fight disinformation because in order to fight it, you have to first present it, and they're afraid of amplifying it. I think that it's time to set that fear aside. That cat is out of the bag. Lewis, thanks for the call. It's good talking with you. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. Did you know that there have been 8 federal judges who have been convicted and removed from the federal bench? 15 altogether have been impeached. 8 have been removed from office since the beginning. 3 of them since 1988, including one judge, Thomas Porteous down in Louisiana, who was impeached and removed from office for signing false financial declarations under penalty of perjury, which it turns out it looks like Clarence Thomas did for quite a number of years when he did not disclose, as he is required by law to do, that his wife was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Heritage Foundation. That and his perjury around Anita Hill and others, there were numerous witnesses that didn't even get called, could legitimately spark an impeachment of Clarence Thomas. We got a video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Mark in Philadelphia. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Mr. Hartmann, how are you, sir? Are you familiar
I am
with
well.
Malcolm
What's
Nance?
on your mind?
Are you familiar with Malcolm Nance?
Oh, yeah, he's been on this show. I have great respect for Malcolm Nance.
Okay, absolutely. I think he's one of the finest, most intelligent individuals on the liberal side. He predicted everything. I've been following him for 5 years, read a couple books. He predicted everything here about Trump starting a civil war and transnational money laundering into conservative groups like you just said, the Heritage Foundation, the NRA. He predicted the NRA would be used as a money laundering operation, which it is, and shut down for that. And he's been almost 100%. And he predicted that eventually these right-wing news agencies would be putting convicted criminals on and giving a voice to the Flynns and the Stones and the Bannons and the Jerry Falwells and Don Jr. and Giuliani's. And they're actually using convicted criminals from the Trump campaign on right-wing media to justify their crimes. I mean, these guys are already convicted. These guys, these are indicted. They pled guilty. They needed pardons, so you know they're guilty. And right-wing media has been embracing them, and they're criminals. And now I understand that Sarah Huckabee is running for governor in Arkansas, and they got her on videotape for 7 months lying to the American people, wearing her Trump tattoo on her forehead the way the Charles Manson family wore a Nazi tattoo. And how the heck is she going to get elected?
Well, not literally, Mark, but do you know what her main sales pitch is for the people of Arkansas?
What is that?
Well, interestingly, the previous governor, I believe it was Asa Hutchinson, signed a piece of legislation that banned any city in Arkansas from being a, quote, sanctuary city. So that's already on the books in Arkansas. Her campaign, though, when she announced her campaign, she said that her major issue was going to be preventing sanctuary cities or ending sanctuary cities in Arkansas. There are no sanctuary cities in Arkansas. ICE can come into any police department, any person who calls the police and says, you know, hey, I'm being raped or I was raped or my house is being broken into. You know, ICE can now show up if they think that person is not a citizen, is here without documentation. But that, you know, so she's even running on a lie. So spot on, Mark. Thanks a lot for the call. Peter in Milford, Connecticut. Hey, Peter, what's up?
Oh, wonderful. Hi, Tom. Yeah, very quick. I'm a retired trained security guard, no gun and all that stuff, but for years I took it very seriously. And it, just very simple, you learn immediately that you keep your eyes open, your nose always aware, and you're always waiting for the 100-year storm. You know, so the most difficult thing to do is to sit in the chair and stay awake, but you must do that, because if you're waiting for the 100-year storm, you think it's, you define it as there's your distraction and what's going on over here. So, and it doesn't have to be crash, boom, whatever. You could smell some wires burning. You know, you always see people come in today with white shirts. I don't know. Most things you keep in your head, and a report, you know, the reports you write have nothing to do with that. You're trained over and over again. It's very, very important that you write a report accurately and clearly, because that you use in court. But all those details that I'm remembering, well, you want to ask me in court, fine. If not, well, there's the report. So anyway, that's my background. No gun and all this stuff. Very simple stuff. So the first, that's wonderful. The first series of programs, you know, we're talking about do you arrest all those people or not? And I was never going to call after I love your show and I watch all the time, but your response was something like, okay, I'm calling, because obviously you arrest all of them and you bring them in interrogation room. No. You bring them in and, you know, come in, and whatever the rules are, you got to have somebody with them. And all this movie stuff that, you know, you hear a baby cry, you know, if it's hungry, this, that, and the other. Well, I'm good at that, so I'm the guy that you'd want. Maybe I'm just hypothetically. And
so your point is that these people need to be interrogated. And I think your 100-year storm thing is absolutely spot on. When I was learning how to fly, my flight instructor said the life of a pilot is hours and hours of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. And I'm guessing that's true for security guards as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect, but it's not interrogation. That's somebody else's job. Me, they come in, doesn't mean I'm low key. Come in, you ask them their name, you know their tone of their voice. Okay, just you're not judging, and you're remembering all this stuff. And it could be a 12-year-old, it could be anybody. They're turned.
Yeah.
The question is, what do I represent to them?
Right, and we've got to find out, you know, how did you get radicalized? Where did you learn this? Who are the ringleaders? Who organized these things? What role did elected officials play in this? I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow and more as we go through the week. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and people around you. And take a walk.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. Gabby takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at gabby.com/Tom. HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. And Superbeats, heart chews for heart-healthy energy. More info at superbeatsradio.com/Tom.